Evening, everybody. So welcome to this trustee learning session, trustee learning program session from Getting On Board. This is about using trusteeship to help you transition to a paid role in the charity sector. So tonight we've got Meena Anand from the Careers Company, and Meena's presenting, and then I'm involved as well. But first of all, a bit of housekeeping from me. So you will have seen that the session is being recorded. You will get sent the recording and you will also get sent the slides. Please note that the session will also eventually go onto YouTube. That recording doesn't include the chat. So anything you put in the chat won't go onto YouTube, although the recording we send you via the Zoom link will include the chat. You've been muted as you've come into the session, so please stay muted. Just keeps everything nice and clear sound-wise. We've enabled closed captions at our end, so if you'd like subtitles, you need to click the CC or closed caption button on your device. Please feel free to use the chat to ask questions, to share reflections. We'd really love to hear from you. And then a huge thank you to our sponsors, Charisma, Starfish, TPP, Peridot and Diversifying Group. They're all trustee recruitment agencies. If you are an aspiring trustee, do look them up because they'd be brilliant places for you to register with. And it's thanks to their support that this session and other sessions in the trustee learning programme are free of charge. So, Meena, shall I pass over to you and you can introduce yourself and get going?
Absolutely. Thank you, Penny. And great to have you to be here. And thank you for the invitation again, Penny. Let me talk a little bit about what we're trying to cover today. So first of all, you are in the right place if you are looking for a career health check. You are in the right place if you are thinking about moving to the charity sector. And you are especially in the right place if you're thinking about how a trustee role might help you with your career. And so I'm Meena Anand. I am CEO and founder of the Careers Company. I'll talk a little bit about the Careers Company in a minute. I have a plural career myself, so I transitioned from being an HR director for many years, so almost 25 years, and I now have a plural career which consists of 4 non-exec roles, including 2 trustee roles. I also, in addition to being the CEO for the Careers Company, I also am part-time CEO for another HR-related organisation called City HR. And so, what are we going to be covering today? So I want to talk to you a little bit about who the Careers Company are. And it is very much linked to the kind of trustee space. The second thing is really kind of, oh, sorry, Penny, do you mind going back a little bit? So the second thing is actually just a personal health check. You know, we don't often have time to actually spend on our careers or even thinking about our careers. So I'd like you to just take the next kind of 20 minutes or so, just to think about where you are now in terms of your career. If you look at the research around careers, we're expected to have between 5 or 7 careers in our lifetime now, not just jobs. And so career management is a really important part and a really important skill set that we need to hone. And if you take nothing away from this exercise or from the session today, it's really that career management is an essential skill set. We are talking about board roles today, and particularly the trustee space. So I really want to focus on how a board role can support career success, irrespective of which stage you're at in terms of your career. And then I know Penny is going to talk a little bit about how to actually become a trustee. So once hopefully we've planted the seed today to become a trustee, and Penny is going to be talking through around how do you actually practically make that happen. And happy to kind of take your questions at the end. So who is the Careers Company? And so essentially we see ourselves as a disruptor in the career development space. We recently founded, so it's only September 2021 we actually were founded. And the reason that makes us different is there's lots of organizations, including a lot of the recruitment companies that Penny mentioned at the beginning, that are fabulous in getting diverse candidates through the door, into organizations, into the board space. what the careers companies really focus on is what happens to those individuals once they take up those roles. So are they engaged? Are they successful? Do they get promoted? You know, are they seen by the leadership cadre in organizations? And we recognize that that is a challenge from an individual perspective. So there are some kind of issues in terms of diverse individuals and some of the career barriers they face, but also I come at this from an HR perspective in that systemically organizations have real challenges with the systems and processes they talk about, and particularly in the career space, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Why do we do what we do? I mean, quite frankly, if you look at trustee diversity itself, and even if you just look at gender diversity, you know that that's a real challenge already. And if you multiply that across all of our industry groups, you know there's a whole load of work that we all need to do in the diversity space. And it's really about creating boards, in this case, are diverse, and not just because of not just to kind of tick a box, but really to make sure that those groups that are making some of the key decisions for organizations really come from a kind of diverse space. There is real diversity of thought. If I can have the next slide, please. So this session is really about conversation, and the business model I have is all about conversation. And today really is no exception. I know we're in kind of webinar format, but actually do put your questions into the chat. I really want to make sure that you get as much out of it of that session as you can. So ask questions. If you've got a specific comment to make, please do put that in as well. So we're here to have a conversation. So the first part of the kind of the webinar, I promised you a career health check, and that starts with this whole idea of what is a career in the first place. And again, if you look, I want you to look at the pictures, and I want you to think about your career. And if you're in the chat, can you just put in which the number, the picture that best represents your career? Five, Gurpreet, yeah. Oh, other, okay. If you could put in Gurpreet, if it is five, if you can let me know what other means for you. Okay, so a few ones and twos. Four, yeah. Five and pivoted. Okay, great that we have got a real cross-section of what a career means to different people. It means it's up in the air. Yeah, understood. Yeah, I get that. Feel free. Yeah. Yeah, no, amazing that actually we have this for max. Yeah, I get that, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that means. I mean, as we know, there really is no right answer to what this looks like. But it's interesting that education systems and organizations as systems actually tend to kind of force us to think about a career as a linear progression. So number one, they tend to kind of, all the systems and processes that exist in organizations are kind of push us in this whole direction of having a linear career. And I'm really grateful to kind of see that actually people are thinking beyond that. So let me kind of go through each of these in a little bit more detail. And for those of you who have marked yourself as one, hopefully that might give you some ideas of kind of thinking differently about your career. So picture one is this whole idea of linear progression, very traditional, essentially it's a series of related jobs, often in the same organization. And success is kind of quite objective. People can see it. If you looked on LinkedIn profiles, you can see that actually this kind of linear progression that they've seen. So it's very objective, and it's really focused on pay levels, promotion, titles. That's what career success actually looks like in that linear career progression piece. If we look at boundaryless, then, so this is when a career actually is not bound to any organization or in fact any occupation. It may just be a series of jobs loosely connected somehow. The protean career is, I don't know if there are any kind of individuals who understand Greek, but protean means shape shifting. And this is where a career is very much subjective. It's very much focused on what the individual takes from that career. So it's very personal to you. So when you looked at LinkedIn, it may not be obvious what career success actually means to these individuals, because it's very much linked to you. And in terms of CVs and stuff, it's really incumbent upon the individual to kind of that profile piece on the top of your CV to explain how the different roles or the different organizations you've worked for actually link in. 4 is my favorite, and actually that's what I view as career success. When I look at, what career means to me, it's actually a curated set of experiences, and it really is being thoughtful around what experience do I want to have. So for me, travel was a super important part of a career. I've been really lucky enough and fortunate enough to kind of lived and worked all over the world, and I've worked in about 10 different countries. And so that was really important for me. That might not be the same for you. It may well be for you. Curated set of experiences might well be about the clients that you kind of work with, or the industry sector that you work in. So that's kind of curated set of experiences. And then in terms of other, for you, it was being up in the air. For me, it could be things like a plural career. You often hear about squiggly careers. So I just want you to kind of think about, after this session, actually probably thinking about, well, what does a career actually mean to me? And how do I kind of define it? And hopefully this has given you a little bit of thought for moving away from that kind of linear piece. So that's one part of the health check. The second thing is really thinking about, what does career success mean to you? So again, I'm gonna just a bit of a poll question. So career success means very different things to different people, and it may mean different things depending on which stage of your career you're at as well. So focus on today. What does career success mean for you today? So it could be, what, I just need to get by. Things are really quite tough at the minute. 2 is about getting that bigger promotion. 3, it's about being able to use my skills. Okay, so there's a few 3s. In fact, Penny, you put a 3 as well. So there's quite a few around actually just being able to use your skill set, and that is so important. 4, it's all about the experience. 5, I've never really thought about it. Or 6, something else. So we've got a lot of 3s in the room. Fabulous. And actually, from a trustee perspective, that is a fabulous place to be in, because when you're becoming a trustee, actually using your skills in a very different space and in a very different kind of setting with a different industry, different set of people, is precisely what a trustee does. So let's move on to move away from career success, and let's look at what career stage you're at. So because career success means different things to different people, and it means different things to different people at different stages of their career. So I don't know what kind of group we've got on the call today, but it's just helpful to kind of think about, the trustee role, irrespective of which career stage you're in. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about that. So you might be early on in your career. It's those kind of first few years of kind of working life. You're probably still exploring whether you made the right decision, made the right industry choice, made the right kind of job choice. It's really about building competence and confidence. And it may well be that actually you realize that, that the decision you're making at this stage may not sustain you for, that kind of 70-year career. If you speak to Linda Grattan. But it's often associated with really accelerated growth. Okay, so some of you are in the second act. Okay, early career. Okay, great. So there's a few of you in the second act. So it's often associated with accelerated growth. You know, the promotions kind of come in. If you looked at that linear piece, you can see subjectively those linear things actually come in. Promotions come in thick and fast. If you're mid-career, and I think there's a couple on mid-career as well. This is about establishing yourself, and it's not necessarily establishing yourself just in the industry, but also establishing yourself as a professional. And so some of the things you might kind of take on are much more risk-based. The decisions you make are kind of a little bit more weighted. This is often the time that people plateau in their careers as well. You know, early careers, promotions come thick and fast. And at this stage, it may well be that those jobs actually don't come up that quickly. The job that you really want actually doesn't come up that quickly. You may lose focus at this period. There's just less opportunity at this stage. And this is typically when people take career breaks and so on. So there's a lot happening at this kind of mid-career level. And then we talk about second act, and I like calling it a second act as opposed to pre-retirement. A lot of people call it that as well. But a lot of this stage is very much around maintenance of existing career success. It's about potentially disengaging from kind of broader corporate life. So I said I moved from kind of traditional corporate life about 3 years ago. And it might be something where you actually start to not just think about pre-retirement considerations, but shifting career completely. I just want to make a point of difference around men and women in terms of early career, in terms of these different stages. Men and women actually have very different career patterns. And that's what organizations tend not to recognize. So early career, pretty much neck and neck, if you're male or female, there isn't a whole load of difference. It gets quite dramatically different kind of mid-career. So women, and a lot of research actually calls this stage for women as being pragmatic endurance. And that is so apt, because if you talk to people, you talk to women at this particular stage, it really is about getting by. It really is about not necessarily focus. Career success actually might, if you go back to that question around career success, it really is just about getting by. It's not necessarily wanting that kind of promotion. It's really about prioritizing other aspects of your life. Whereas the men typically still have that on that linear trajectory. It changes again at second act. So the women actually they have this thing called career rejuvenation, where often women will actually change careers, change focus, very much purpose-driven careers. So they're actually almost kind of, there's this new lease of life for them. Men actually are completely the opposite. When they approach this stage, it is very much around black and white, shutting things down and starting something different. Whereas women actually really want to kind of build relationships again, change careers, re-establish themselves. They've got more time and effort. So just to think about career patterns, because organizations typically don't recognize and set up systems to kind of look at men and women differently. Irrespective if you're a man or woman, though, I just want to talk to you about trusteeships now. And I want to end by just talking about how important a trustee role could be for your career development. So I'm not going to go into defining what a trustee is, because I'm sure if we've got a question around that, I'm sure Penny can cover it later on. I really want to focus on actually you joining a board of an organization, so the highest organization decision-making group, and why that might be amazing for your career, irrespective of which stage you're at. So first of all, it very much builds out your career management and leadership skills. A lot of people call a trustee role as a mini MBA. You get aspects of, you hit all aspects of the organization, whether it's finance, from a risk perspective, from a people perspective, and especially early on in your career. So there's a couple of people that are early on in their careers. It's a fabulous way to signal to your organization that you want more, that you want to move into that leadership space. That's what you're looking for. And in terms of if you're mid-career and you've got kind of plateaued a trustee role in terms of leadership skills, it really does kind of give you that new perspective, perhaps on your own organization. And perhaps it gives you exposure to that next level, leadership level, but in an entirely different space. So that's the first thing, just building out your career and leadership management skills. The second thing is, and we all know this, it enables us to kind of give back, but in a very different way. It's very much of that kind of playing at that, not just volunteering on an ad hoc basis, but actually making a strategic contribution to the industry and to the organization. So the third bit is it's, creates a real point of difference on your CV. Jobs are super competitive at the minute, and particularly some of the more coveted roles. And actually, you want anything that kind of makes you stand out from the rest of that kind of shortlist. And a trustee role is just a fabulous way to do that. Fourthly, and I use my board role, my first board role to do this is actually build out my market and industry knowledge. So the first board role I had was a trustee role at a HR charity. And it helped me, having spent 16 years in the same organization, it really gave me that network out and market knowledge outside of my industry sector. So fabulous way to build out your industry knowledge, particularly if you're looking at pivoting from a corporate life into the charitable space. Builds critical networks. I can't tell you how important this is. So I sit on the board of an NHS trust, and while it's not in the trustee space, the CEO, it's still the reason still, the rationale still applies. The CEO of that NHS trust is actually the mental health lead for the country. There's no way I would have got access to that kind of individual had it not been for me joining that particular board. And even the school, I am a trustee of a multi-academy trust, and there's 7 schools, and actually even in that space, one of the trustees is this head of HR for a massive law firm, and they end up being one of my clients. And it was only through that relationship that that happened. So building out your networks is a massive advantage to becoming from a trustee's role. And if you're taking a career break, if you listen to Linda Grattan, you have 100-year life. That means you're probably spending 70 years actually working. And so at some point during that 70-year period, you are likely to take a break. A trustee role gives you that fabulous continuity as you're taking a career break for whatever reason. It could be maternity leave, paternity leave, sabbaticals, all sorts of things. But actually gives you that sense of continuity. And the last thing, and I know a few of you are actually at this stage, it really is a fabulous starting point for building out that kind of post-executive or portfolio career. A lot of people kind of assume, a lot of senior executives that I speak to actually assume that they're going to walk into a non-exec role for a FTSE 250 company. That might have happened in the past, but I can tell you now, it's so competitive, those roles. And they, if you're looking at a FTSE 250 role, they really wouldn't even consider you if you haven't had some board experience. And some of the kind of larger charities, some of the trustee space is a fabulous way to kind of gain that kind of board experience and make you a really credible candidate for that FTSE 250 role. So lots of reasons in terms of how from a career development perspective, taking on a trustee role is a fabulous opportunity and an option. I'm going to stop now and hand over back to Penny to talk about. So if we planted the seed and you're interested, what can you do about it?
Thank you, Meena. Really interesting. Thank you. And looking forward to coming back to some questions. If people have any questions, feel free to post them into the chat. So I'm going to talk about how to become a trustee in terms of where to find vacancies and something about CVs, but actually something broader around how to apply. But the first thing I want to do is I just want to run through a couple of the major barriers to becoming a trustee. These are super common barriers, and this is on top of not knowing what a trustee is. If you're still at the stage where you're thinking, I don't really know what one is at the moment, I'm going to signpost you at the end to how getting on board can help, because we have lots of free training and guides on what a trustee role is. The first barrier I want to talk about, though, is not knowing how to navigate the application process. And I'd love to hear if anybody's tried to become a trustee and hasn't quite managed yet, because you're very much not in a minority. I think the issue we've got here is it's not as simple as merely applying. We think that about 90% of roles are actually never advertised. So still, and hence my picture, the most common way of becoming a trustee is by being asked. Which isn't helpful if actually you're trying to break into trusteeship. But even where roles are advertised, they're really very heavily skewed. So they're generally skewed to larger charities, and we're going to come on to why that's a barrier in a minute. They can be skewed towards certain cities, and certainly London, which is great if you're based in London, by the way. And you'll see as well that if you look at advertised vacancies, they're often skewed towards, you know, we'd like a lawyer, we'd like an accountant. And if you haven't got that linear career that Meena was talking about, you know, some of us would find that harder to present ourselves. So the next barrier is assuming you'll join the board of a large national charity. This is incredibly common, and it's a huge barrier actually to becoming a trustee. Now, you can be completely forgiven for having this assumption. If you don't work in or with charities, you maybe think that this is the charity sector. But actually 1.3% of charities in England and Wales earn 72% of the sector's income. That's why they have such a huge public profile. But actually most charities look more like this. They're small to medium, sometimes locally based, but sometimes working nationally or internationally and still very small. And 75% of charities have an annual income of under £100,000. So this is where you can expect to land, certainly for your first trustee role. There's nothing lesser about these organisations. Yes, they're smaller, but they have amazing impact often. They're certainly not inferior. And the reason why you probably won't step onto the board of a large charity as your first position is simply statistics, just the odds. There's a very few positions in those charities, and they tend to be able to be very fussy about exactly what they're looking for. My third barrier is around not being able to represent your assets well. Again, incredibly common. And we're going to talk through some of this as we go. So first of all, not being able to work out exactly what you've got and why and how that might be useful to a charity. That's really difficult. The fact that typical CVs, cover letters, application forms simply aren't written for trustee positions. They're written for you to progress within your own sector or skill set. And then often missing the fact that charities care above all else that you have passion for their work. That is just as important as the skills and knowledge that you might bring. One without the other, and you're not going to secure a role. And I think people can forget that, because you wouldn't normally apply for a paid job role and bang on and on about how much you're keen on the organisation and you're passionate about their work. So the good news is all of this is actually surmountable. So none of these barriers, potentially with the exception of the behind closed door recruitment, which is more difficult to tackle, most of these barriers are actually surmountable. So the first thing you'd need to do as a potential trustee is to work out what kind of charity you want to join as a trustee. So what kinds of causes might you be interested in? It's a great idea to look through some vacancies that can help you kind of narrow down what you might be looking for. So I think charities and trustees, potential trustees, are looking for the same thing. You're looking for a cause that you really care about, and you're looking to be super useful to that organisation. That is exactly what the charity wants from its trustees. It wants somebody who cares, and it wants somebody who's going to be useful. So we're looking for that match, a bit like dating. However, absolutely don't agonise over the first role. I think becoming a trustee only ever opens doors for further career and trustee positions. So it might be that you say, oh, you know, I can't decide between animal welfare and sports or arts or international development. Well, just pick one. And then the next time, after 2 or 3 or 4 years, when you've done a term, you can go and do another cause. So don't agonise over that first position. I think one of the most important things I can say to you about applying to be a trustee is not to be disheartened if you get rejected. So treat it like a job search. You're probably going to need to apply for several. You'll be, great if you get the first one, but I would absolutely go in with the expectation that you're going to need to put some legwork in, that you're going to need to apply for several. Now, if you get rejected, that's because the charity has seen a better match in somebody else. That's either because there is just a better match, but it might also be that actually you haven't got your application right and you haven't worked through how to articulate what you're bringing and how to present that to a charity. And that's what we're going to talk about. So in terms of thinking about what you're bringing to a trustee role, have a look, and we'll send you these slides afterwards, have a look at these buckets and just try and try and populate some of these different buckets. So you've got education and qualifications, your skills and qualities. So that might be you're a great details person, you love collaborating, you're always the collaborator, you can see the big picture. Professional experience, so what is your day job? What do you do in the rest of your life? Your passions, it might be that you're super sporty and you're going for a sports charity, for example. Any volunteering, fundraising or campaigning experience, super critical, definitely worth bigging up. And then potentially life experience. And by that, I mean something that's relevant to the organisation that you're applying to. So this is really a personal choice as to whether you share this, but it might, for example, be that you're applying for a charity that supports women who are financially excluded and you've had personal experience of that, or it might be a mental health charity and you've had mental health struggles. Now, this is very much a personal choice and you should never, ever feel pushed or forced into revealing something that you don't want to. Now, on this list, these aren't of equal importance. So the things that are probably of most importance to a charity that you're applying to is the middle band there. So what do you bring in terms of professional experience and knowledge, and why do you care? Why are you applying to them? The other things are good, but they're not as important. And actually, I see hundreds and hundreds of trustee applications each year. I see people really focus on the one in the top right there, soft skills, transferable skills. Actually, that's less important to a charity. It's very important once you get there, but it's not going to get you through the door. So let's talk a bit about how to find a trustee vacancy. And there's really three main ways. So the first way is through volunteering and through other existing relationships. So you might basically, the charity already, you know them because you volunteer for them, because you know somebody there, because you use their services. Now, I'm not really going to talk about that one. The other two main ways I am going to talk about, one is through trustee vacancy listings. And then the final one is by approaching charities cold, by going speculative. So here are some trustee vacancy sites. As I say, you'll get these slides afterwards. These are also on the Getting On Board website. Now, the best thing you can do off this list, the first two are the most important. So I know I've put Google and that's really, really obvious, but actually Google will pick out trustee roles from all of the others that are listed there. So it does your work for you. It's quite sensitive as well. So you could say a location, Trustee Jobs Cambridge. You could say a cause, Trustee Jobs Education, for example. If you get too specific, it doesn't work. So if you say Trustee Jobs Nuneaton Dogs, probably won't work, although I'm sure somebody here is currently Googling that to see if it does work. Now, the next on the list is Reach Volunteering. That's the only other one off this list I'm going to pull out. Reach is the biggest placer of trustees. It places hundreds and hundreds of people each year. It's completely free of charge, and you can either browse its vacancies and it allows you to filter down by lots of different criteria, or you can create a free profile so that charities can contact you, and you can set up an alert. So you tell it where you live, what you're looking for, what you're bringing, and it will email you when those vacancies come up, rather than you needing to remember to do a search every month. So it does a lot of the work for you. So it's really worth having a play with that. Now, this is all great, but as I mentioned before, we think about only 10% of trustee roles are ever advertised. So this is only really a microcosm of what's potentially out there. And as I mentioned earlier, it's skewed towards larger charities, towards London, towards certain skills. And definitely you'll see a lot more chair and treasurer adverts than there are chairs and treasurer. It's disproportionately reflected because they're hard to recruit. So the other thing you might think about doing is going absolutely speculative. So are there charities that you already know because you've seen them locally? You might do a Google in particular areas you're interested in, or you can use the Charity Commission Register of Charities, which has got 168,000 registered charities on it. The advanced search allows you to break down by location, by cause, by size, and so on. So it's a really good tool if you know what you're interested in. And I'm not going to talk about how to approach charities, but you'll find some information about that either on Getting on Board webinars or in our free guide, which I'll signpost you to later. So let's move on to the application process. So application is still usually by CV and cover letter. There's the odd application form, but they are few and far between, increasing in frequency, but definitely still mainly CV and cover letter. You'd be invited generally for an interview. That can be, there's a huge spectrum of interview experiences. So it can be anything from, oh, meet me in a cafe on the high street on Tuesday, and then Thursday you're invited to a board meeting and you're in, to 3 panel discussions with presentations and meeting multiple people and multiple stages. So very, very formal and everything in between. You may be invited to observe the board before you're actually appointed. Always ask questions, always look around. Remember that this process is for you as much as for the charity. So you're trying to find a good match for you, and make sure you get an induction. So let's talk a bit about cover letters. Now, essentially, you are trying to answer 2 questions, and they sound so simple, but I would say the vast majority of cover letters I see for trustee positions don't answer these questions. And the questions are, how can you help? And why are you applying? So the why are you applying one is missing from almost every single trustee application where they haven't had any sort of input or help, or they haven't been a trustee before, so they wouldn't know that the organisation really cares about that. Now, how can you help? That can be a really difficult question to answer, can't it? You need to do as much research as you can into the charity. What do they say in their application materials? What does their annual report say, which is on the Charity Commission's website? What can you find out from their website and their newsletter and everything else they put out? If you get a chance to have an informal conversation with the charity CEO or equivalent, absolutely grasp it with both hands. Do remember that that is a kind of mini form of interview as well, though, that is, that's the stage. It says it's an informal chat, but it's kind of interview. Why are you applying? Could be anything from, I've had personal experience of the kind of thing that you're tackling, and therefore I know it's important, to this is something that I've always cared about. So you don't need to have a really cogent argument as to why it matters to you personally. You just need to explain why it matters and be genuine about it. Now, your letter should read as if it's written for them and only them. Now, in reality, you'll probably write a letter for one charity and then you'll adapt it for the next one and then the next one and so on. But it shouldn't look like a circular. It shouldn't look like a Christmas round robin that you've sent to half of the charity sector. It needs to be specific to them. And I guess just before I move on to CVs, just to say something about why do charities care that you care about them? And I think it's to do with retention and about effectiveness of trustees. So trustees are volunteers. The vast majority of trustees are unpaid. And every charity has had the experience of having flaky trustees that kind of sign up and then don't really, don't come to meetings, don't read the papers, don't really do the thing that they were hoping they were doing. So this passion check, I guess, is part of that. It's part of checking that you're going to stick around. So tips for trustee CVs. First of all, make it accessible. Now, what do I mean by that? I'm willing to bet that at least half of you have got a job title that makes absolutely no sense outside of your sector or your company or your organisation. And I've written down some job titles today. These are real ones. I was looking through some CVs for one of our courses, and these are real job titles. I hope nobody's on this call that might have applied for one of our programmes today. We had an associate dean. We had a venture partner. We had a corporate financier. We had an FX trading product specialist and an insight director. Now, what the hell does any of that mean to anybody who doesn't work on those things? We also had an account manager and an area manager, which I think we know kind of what they mean, but it doesn't really tell us anything. So when I say make it accessible, it's remembering that when you use your CV in your career, it's often going to be read by somebody who's going to understand what it is you do for a living. When you apply to be a trustee, it might be read by a head teacher, a social worker, a marketing director, a HR director, a full-time carer. It could be literally anybody or a combination of anybody's. So it's got to be understandable. Don't forget your wider transferable experience, particularly in terms of volunteering. And in terms of any relevant personal experience you're happy to share. You're likely to big this up more than you would in a paid job application. Now, any committee or governance experience, however old, however kind of much that you don't think of it as governance, definitely mention it. So that might be being on the PTA, it might be being on a fundraising committee, it might be that you've been on various steering committees at work. It could be that you've been on a neighbourhood organising committee for something kind of community minded. All of that is really, really relevant in terms of governance experience. And again, that might not be on your professional CV. So these are new things to mention. Make it as short as you can. So in some sectors, CVs are really, really long. The longest I've seen are in academia, where it can be, 12, 20 pages because it's lists of papers. There's not a lot of point in that because it's not going to get read. So make it short. Now, just remember that being a trustee is a strategic role. It's not an operational role. There's a grey area there because lots of trustees are operational because their charities are very small. But actually, when you're applying to be a trustee, you're not going to go in to be doing the job. So if you are a marketing person in your day job, you're not going to be doing the marketing for the charity. So just remember that if your CV and your cover letter is very operational, that could actually go against you. And then finally, you might want to add that you're actively looking to join a charity board. And I've got an example here for you, which is, so this person says, I'm a senior sales and marketing professional. I'm actively looking to join a charity board. Skills of relevance to a charity board, sales and income generation, marketing and communications, finance, change management, and business strategy. And then your CV would follow after this. So you're making it super crisp and easy for a shortlisting charity to go, right, this is what this person's bringing. This person who is an FX trading product specialist, this is what they mean. Actually, it probably isn't, but you know what I mean? It's really explaining in layman's terms. Now, these terms might be things you don't use about yourself at all in any other context. You've probably become quite specialist or niche. You probably use technical terms to describe what it is you do. But actually, in this context, you need to make it super easy for to be shortlisted for a trustee position. Okay, so final section before we move into questions is some thoughts on how being a trustee can support your transition into a paid role in the charity sector. And Meena's talked about some of these already. So obviously CV points, it's CV points wherever you end up, whether you're in the charity sector or elsewhere. Understanding of the charity sector. I'm going to say more about that in a minute. And then motivation. So this really shows intent. It shows that you are, you're the kind of person that's volunteering for a charity. So real values alignment with the charity sector. Now, in terms of the understanding of charities, I've got here in my bullets the 4 most common thing that I hear from people that become trustees and then say to me, oh, I was really surprised by that. These are the things that I most commonly hear. So something around scale and resourcing. So we've talked about how small the charities tend to be. So often if you work for a much larger organisation, that's a huge eye-opener when you go into an organisation which has got 2 part-time members of staff and you've been used to having a finance department, let alone a finance person, a finance department, a HR department, a marketing department, and all of a sudden you're in this teeny-weeny charity with a couple of jacks of all trades. So that's a real kind of mind-bending moment for many people. Something around integrity and values that this is so often that people say this to me around, wow, the staff are really passionate. They really care about this organisation. They really go the extra mile. And that's something that people remark to me quite often. And I don't think that's unique to the charity sector, by the way, but often it comes as something of note to people. And then the third thing is about attitude to profit and success. Because for the charity sector, money is a means to an end. And again, this isn't unique to the charity sector because you could argue that for government also, for the government sector, this is the same. For us, we need money. We need money to do what we want to do. But what we care about isn't actually the bottom line. It's about the charitable impact in the field that we're working in. And often the least profitable services are often the most impactful services that we could possibly run. And I think that, that is a real mental shift for people that have worked in commercial organizations. And then this sense that there's a lot to learn. So there's a really unhelpful narrative, a very widespread narrative that charities are somehow the poor cousin, that they're shonky and professional and that all of the sectors can teach them everything, and that I'm going to become a trustee in order to generously share my wisdom and fix charities. If you go in with that attitude, you won't get a trusteeship or a job. So if there's any chance that you might have a bit of that bias, I think have a little word with yourself, and certainly having a trusteeship will tackle that. We all have things to learn from each other, and no trustee goes in as the finished article either, or member of staff. We've all got development gaps. So I think being a trustee in advance of going to work in the charity sector can really help you think differently about your experience to date, to think about what is it that where could I add value? How is it going to be different in this sector? And it's going to help you identify potential development gaps. And thinking about how to fill them. So to give an example, for example, you might be, I don't know, a salesperson in your day job, and you might think, right, I'm going to bring that income generation experience into the charity sector. And actually, by being a trustee, you might think, oh, I don't know enough about fundraising. I've never been exposed to legacy fundraising, to donations fundraising, to community fundraising. No idea how all that works. And although I'm not applying to be a fundraiser of that sort, it's going to really help me to do some reading, to go on a course, to shadow somebody to learn more about those. So I'm just going to share this quote. This quote is literally hot off the press because somebody posted it on LinkedIn about half an hour before this session. I had a different quote and I replaced it because this was brilliant. So one of our sponsors is Peridot Partners. They're a trustee recruitment agency. And this is what one of their members of staff said. She said, I always advise people considering a transition, that's to the charity sector, to think about a trustee role first. It gives you valuable insight, helps you see where your skills might add best value, and shows commitment and intent. And I just felt like this summed it up so beautifully. So I'm going to pass to Meena in a second just to talk a bit more about the Careers Company, but just to signpost you to other support you can get from getting on board. So this image on the slide is a free guide we have. You can download that from our website. That has lots more about how to become a trustee in there. We also have, this session is part of our trustee learning program, which is free 1-hour sessions like this one, self-contained, all for and about trustees and aspiring trustees. So you can do one on the legal responsibilities of trustees, what is a trustee and how do I become one, finances for trustees, and so on and so forth. And we have a program called the Charity Board Leadership Program, which is our flagship program for people who are aspiring trustees and who haven't been trustees before. So Meena, I'm going to pass to you to talk a bit more about the Careers Company.
Sure, thank you, Penny, and so helpful. And I know Penny's covered a lot of ground in that session, so please do kind of put in any questions or comments that you've got on anything Penny's covered. I mean, just to end with a little bit about, just to remind you a little bit about what we do. We are kind of super passionate about career success, not just about getting people into organizations. And we particularly focus on the career success of diverse employee groups. And then as a quick plug, the next slide is just really how you might be able to kind of find us online. And I'm going to stop there and just kind of take any questions or comments that you have about what we talked about. It's fabulous to see you as well.
So feel free to ask any questions. I've had some questions in, Meena, already.
Oh, have you? Oh, sorry.
Yes, they've been sent directly. So feel free, if you prefer to stay anonymous and you want to send them directly to me or Meena, feel free. Got a couple of really interesting questions here. So the first one is, do you think that trusteeship is more valuable if somebody's moving into the charity sector than other forms of volunteering?
I personally do, only because I think a trustee role actually is volunteering, but at a very different level. And I personally think at any stage of your career, a trustee role is just fabulous. So let me give you an example. I chair a local school board. And my youngest trustee is actually only 19 years old, and he gets an amazing amount from it. And yet I have a 75-year-old actually also on the board whose children went to the school, and equally they get so much out of it. And I just think that kind of level that you actually kind of get involved in of the organization and the school in my case is just on a different level.
I think I could think of one exception to that, because I would definitely agree on the whole. And that might be if if you're thinking about going to work in a charity of a particular sort. So say it's a literacy charity,
Yeah,
or something, or a charity that runs a wildlife reserve. I
yeah,
could kind of think of, if you were quite specific about where you wanted to end up,
fair
that
point.
kind of frontline volunteering
Indeed.
might be useful. But do both.
Do
Why not?
indeed do both.
There's a question here from somebody who is still a student, who said, how, because we've kind of talked about, people who are already in their careers. And you just mentioned a 19-year-old. So this is probably a really nicely follows on from that. How can they position themselves for a trustee role?
Yeah, so I think in terms of positioning themselves, I think actually even Penny talked a little bit about proxy board experience. So she talked a little bit about, committees that you might have got involved in. She talked about kind of leadership roles that you might have had either at school or college. And so what I'd actually do is seek out some of those kind of leadership roles or kind of proxy committee roles where you can actually get that kind of level of working in a group, working in that kind of leadership space, perhaps within the kind of confines or constraints of that kind of student role. But I also wouldn't kind of deter you from actually applying from a trustee role either, because there are some organizations, so charities, schools, that actually are looking for exactly that kind of lived experience. So there's and education is in a very different space these days from when I was at university or college. And I think having that kind of really that kind of near-term lived experience is so important.
And I guess we should signpost the Young Trustees movement, shouldn't we?
Indeed, yes, absolutely.
Organisation.
An associate trustee. A lot of organizations are now thinking about kind of associate trustees as well, where you can actually train to be a trustee, but you may not have the same kind of decision rights that a full trustee would have.
And I was thinking, Meena, about some of the committee type positions that are available to students. So things like student committees.
Totally.
I mean, full trustee on the students' union. There's lots of people, so many people start their trustee career by being a trustee of a students' union.
Finding a club, managing a club at school or university.
Yeah, brilliant. We've got a question here from Sarah. Can you use your trustee experience to pivot into a portfolio career of sitting on corporate boards as a NED? I've heard mixed responses to this.
I think he can only help, right? And yes, I mean, I also have heard this about mixed experience in that the trustee roles don't count as non-execs. But then I think it's also incumbent upon us to just talk about how complex some of the trustee space actually is. So first of all, in the charity sector, they are dual regulated. So charities are dual regulated by by Companies House and also by the Charity Commission as well. So they are complex organizations, and I think it's sometimes that might not come across in terms of the CV or the covering letter that you put together. So yeah, there will always be people that will kind of see it as a second tier approach, but everyone has to start somewhere. And actually, if you're focused on something that you're really passionate about, and that you're gaining some really credible experience in the board space, that's amazing. I think it's just really about positioning it appropriately on your CV and your covering letter.
And I think one of the things I want to say really strongly back to and I'm not saying, Sarah, this is why you're answering the question, but nobody should become a trustee just as a stepping stone to something else. I think for any board position, you need to be all in, don't you, Meena? You need to be there because you want to have impact in that space. And yes, it might be useful for what you want to do next, but actually in and of itself, it's got to be important to you.
Absolutely. And I think so to give you a sense, I mean, my first board role after a long time was actually in the trustee space. And then as a result of that, it's when I actually moved into the kind of more corporate world through that. And they absolutely valued the kind of trustee space.
And I guess it's better than no board experience, isn't it?
Indeed, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And actually, getting on board works with quite a lot of people who come at it from the other direction as well. People who have commercial NED positions and say, actually, I want to, I want to build in some voluntary positions into this portfolio so that it's balanced.
Yep.
So Porvi and Sarah are talking a bit about what we've just been talking about. I've got the impression from speaking to recruiters that trustee roles aren't as valued as paid board roles. And I guess if you're moving on to looking for paid board roles.
So I was also going to say, it goes back to this whole notion about career success. So career success, if you look at it from a linear perspective and you look at the experience of a trustee role objectively in terms of getting paid versus not getting paid, which I know some recruiters actually do, then you can say that actually their notion of career success is very much around that linear piece. What you want to do is actually find recruiters that really value alternative career ideas of career success.
And actually, there's a question on that here, Meena. Somebody's asking if you're running a trusteeship alongside paid work, and I guess that would count for other sorts of volunteering and board positions. Would you say that was a plural career? Yeah, is that a plural career? How would you classify that?
Listen, you can call it what you like. if it helps by calling it a plural career, go for it.
There's a question here about is becoming a trustee a good way to dip your toe into the water if you're thinking about getting paid work in the charity sector?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we covered that a little bit as well in the and it's really about this whole volunteer to career route. And I think even the quote that you had, Penny, it was very much focused on looking at yes, you're working in the charitable space, but actually you're going into it at a very different level. And actually, it's also using your skill set. I mean, somebody once told me that actually, when I was applying for multi-academy trust, that they basically said you're going to get bored if you apply for a small multi-academy trust, with only 1 or 2 schools. And so I think it's really just what appeals to you and what's going to be interesting to you, because it is a long-term commitment. It is kind of up to 9 years, and actually it's also about how you want to. It's also the significant contribution you're making as well. So what do you want to achieve with that 3-year, that 9-year term that you've got?
And I guess the terms, just to clarify, the terms, there isn't a set number of years for trusteeship terms. Some organisations have no terms at all in their governing document.
No,
you wouldn't want, you would want to say, I'm intending to be here for however many years. Most terms are 2 to 4 years. You can be renewed, and the 9 years so that's the upper limit set by the Charity Governance Code. It's not a requirement, it's not a legal requirement, but they say that you've got to have a good reason to be there for longer than 9 years so that the board keeps refreshing. So certainly it doesn't have to be a 9-year commitment in an individual organisation. But hopefully people get the bug and that's it. They're off on being a being board and stick with it, but in different organisations. So thank you for your questions, really interesting. Thank you to the person who said about the Action for Trustee Racial Diversity as well. So we've signposted the Young Trustees Movement, Action for Trustee Racial Diversity, both brilliant places to find some support. So I want to thank Meena. Thank you, that was so interesting, Meena, about career paths, lots to think about there. Thank you also to our sponsors. So I'm just going to repeat their names, and they will be in the slides, but TPP, Peridot, Diversifying Group, Charisma and Starfish, really worth signing up with, whether you want to be a trustee and or move into the charity sector. And they often have specialisms as well. So if you're thinking of a particular, if you come, for example, if you're looking at getting into fundraising, or if you're looking at getting into students' unions, often the agencies will specialise in them. So do some research on that. And then just to say that this session is part of Getting on Board's Trustee Learning Programme. I'm just posting a link now. So do have a look at what else we've got on. We've still got quite a few sessions before Christmas. And I've just posted a link to the evaluation form. You'll get this in a follow-up email. Tell us what you thought of this session, please, and let us know what other ideas you've got for sessions, because most of these sessions are crowdsourced and people that come along give us ideas for new sessions, and so we go. So I hope you all have a lovely evening, and thank you very much for joining us, and thank you, Meena.
Thank you, Penny. Thanks, everyone.